Some humor, new insights on multitasking, some ruminations about learning. That's what we'll talk about today in the new channel update. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to the channel update March. First, like usual, we will have a look at our recent topics from the last couple of weeks. There we had first the soft skill talk about self-efficacy and responsibility. Cryptic name, I have to admit, but an important topic. Because in the area of guidebooks and self-help books, a frequent message is that we need to take control of our life, take the steering wheel into our hands and shape our life and so on. And it is important also to consider the dark and shady side of this idea that is about guilt and responsibility, and this we discussed in that video. Next up was a new addition to our series on biases and fallacies, and this time we had a look at the sunk cost fallacy. This is interesting because it deals with losses, and losses are a major topic in the area of biases and fallacies, because an important aspect of the whole thing is that we deal with losses in a different way than we deal with gains, that we judge them differently. And the sunk cost fallacy is a nice example for that occurs frequently in day-to-day life. You encounter the sunk cost fallacy whenever someone says, "Oh, I put so much money and effort and whatever into this thing, I can't stop now." After that, we discussed Occam's razor, which is a nice rule of thumb that basically says the simplest explanation is usually the best. It is quite a helpful tool for sorting out useless and for sorting out theories that are unlikely to be true. This topic is in a similar area as the video about induction, deduction and abduction we had before. Previously I had put those into the playlist for day-to-day topics. Now I created a new one for those I called scientific reasoning. I guess there will probably be further additions to that in the future. And of course there was a book review, and there we had a look at How We Learn by Stanislas Dehaene. This is already the second book by Dehaene I present to you, because we previously had a look at Reading in the Brain. How We Learn was quite an interesting book, and I think it is a nice start to the topic of learning that we will deal with further on this channel in the future. And I think it's good to have a look at the neuroscientific perspective for a start, because especially in the area of neuroscience there are several misconceptions about learning, several myths, so-called neuromyths, such as the idea that there are different learning types, or strange ideas concerning the left and right side of the brain. And we will probably have a look at some neuromyth here in the future. And so it's good to have a solid foundation for the topic, thanks to How We Learn. So what is to come in the next couple of weeks? We have another 3-week section, 3 videos before the next channel update, And the first of those is a book review, which is unusual. Usually the book review is the final video before the channel update. Now the reason is that the next video will be released on April 1st. So I wondered if I should do something in regard to April Fool's Day. Now, classical April Fool's Day joke would not work well on the channel. Let's say I'd have a video where I tell you strange stuff and at the end I say, haha, it was all made up because of April Fool's Day. Now this would be bad because plenty of people don't watch the video all the way to the end, and so it would end up being quite confusing. So I decided instead to do a topic that has a bit of humor and entertainment, and for that I chose to have a look at a parody of guidebooks and self-help books. Now, unfortunately, the one I selected is a book only available in German. I had a look at a couple of candidates. Unfortunately, there was none that is both available and known in German and English. But I will present it to you nonetheless. We will have a look at it. It is called Endlich erfolglos, literally finally unsuccessful, by one Sebastian 23. Now this is quite a likable name, I think, very nice. So we will have a look at that. I think having some humor in regard to guidebooks and self-help books is a good idea. Apart from the entertainment, I think it also has practical value because the area of guidebooks and self-help books has plenty of shady entries, plenty of one-sided stuff and questionable things. And we shouldn't get too much into that. We should always stay critical and skeptical. And I think for that it's useful to take the whole subject with a bit of humor. In the next week, we will have a look at another topic from the area of self-management, and we will discuss a classic, the Eisenhower Matrix. This is a useful tool for setting priorities, difficult word, priorities. And it is a classic. It is very simple and straightforward, but there are some misconceptions on how to use it, and we will discuss all of that in the video. And finally, there will be a regular book review, and we will have a look at one or two books by Rolf Dobelli. Rolf Dobelli has written two books that are collections of biases and fallacies, so another addition to that topic. Those are a bit different than the books by Kahneman and Taleb. We already discussed, because Kahneman and Taleb, they do their own research, make up their own theories, so they push the science, the field forward and make new discoveries, while Dobelli merely read the existing literature and collected all those different biases and fallacies and created a kind of collection or compilation, which is of course also legitimate, and the books are quite useful as a kind of encyclopedia on biases and fallacies. Now, I said one or two. The reason is he wrote two books with 52 biases and fallacies each, but unfortunately only the first one has been translated into English. It's called The Art of Thinking Clearly. So we will have a look at those. I have a small addendum to the topic of multitasking. There was a video about that previously. I will of course link to it in the video description. As you might recall, the main point was that multitasking doesn't actually exist if we believe we do different things at once. What we actually do is quickly switching between the different tasks. But we don't notice that, which seems a bit of strange. how can we do this without noticing it, without being aware of it? And here there is an interesting tidbit in how we learn, where Dehaene briefly covers the area of multitasking. He describes an interesting experiment. Participants got 2 buttons, one for their left hand they were supposed to press if they heard a certain signal, certain sound, and one for their right hand which they were supposed to press if they saw a signal, a certain signal on a screen in front of them. And those 2 signals, at first they alternated, though the scientists could measure their reaction times, and then they tried doing both at once. And they noticed participants would press first one button, then there was a delay of a couple of hundred milliseconds, and then they would press the other one, and they believed they were pressing them at the same time. And now the question is, why is it that people themselves are not aware? And Dehaene provides quite a simple explanation for that. Since we can only deal with one topic, one thing, one action at a time, focus on one thing at a time, be aware of one thing at a time, the other action we are currently not doing, that is on hold, that we are not aware of until we think about it, and in that moment it stops being on hold because we are actively dealing with it again, and the other action is on hold until we switch back, and so on. I think one example where we kind of become aware of it a little bit is if you've ever tried to watch a movie you didn't see before, that is, and do some work at the same time. And most likely there was a point there when you watched the movie and you were suddenly confused because you said, wait, what's going on there? There was a scene in the movie you didn't understand because there was a scene before that you didn't consciously watch. It was playing while you were doing the work, you were not looking at it, you were not listening to it, and so when you switched back to the movie, you were confused because the movie continued while it was on hold. And I think this is an example where we kind of become aware of it. By the way, Dehaene is quite critical of this misconception of multitasking because his focus is not on performance lost in an office environment, which is of course not exceedingly tragic, but he is thinking of things like using a cell phone while you are driving a car, which is of course highly dangerous because it puts human life at risk. So please don't do that. Keep in mind you can't really do 2 things at the same time. Finally, as the last small topic for today, I'd like to say a few words about learning, specifically about getting into a new subject area for the very first time. This, for example, occurs if you switch to a different job. Due to the crisis in recent years, plenty of people have lost jobs and have to find new ones. And many of them try to get some further education, some additional training to get into a new area. I'm also thinking about elderly people here who are at risk of kind of being left behind and to try to get into computers, internet, smart devices and the like at an elderly age. And in all those cases, delving into a new subject might be frightening at first because it works about like this from my experience. At first, you know very little about this new subject. It's all very vague and nebulous, and you know it's there, but you don't know any details. And then you delve into it for the first time. You start to learn about it. And suddenly you become aware of how big and how complex this subject actually is. You become aware of dozens of subtopics you didn't know before, you were not aware of before. There are plenty of people that are important, plenty of topics, plenty of books, materials that goes on and that you will never be able to read and whatever in its entirety. And this can be quite a frightening and overwhelming moment. You might read the first book about the subject, but instead of really answering all your questions, it turns up dozens of new questions and dozens of other books you feel you need to read as well to get a better understanding. And at this point, you might be overwhelmed by the complexity of it. But stick to it. Keep going. It will get better. Now, of course, you won't suddenly understand all this huge, big, complex topic. But let's say islands of knowledge within that sea of the unknown will form, where you have an understanding of a certain small area, and you have a grasp of that small area, and you can place this small area in the context of all the things you don't know. You have an understanding of how it fits into the big picture, and then you have something to start from, and from there you can expand your understanding of the topic little by little. And then you really start to get a grasp on things. So don't get discouraged if starting on a new topic is overwhelming at first. Keep going, it will get better. Here on the channel, we will continue to explore interesting new topics in the area of soft skills step by step. For today, I'll take my leave. We will see each other again next week. Until then, have a nice day. See you next time.